This is things I wish I could say in Sunday school. I want to share some thoughts and ideas that are different than what we usually hear. My goal is to be really honest rather than inherently faith-promoting. I hope these ideas may spark some interesting discussions with your friends, families, or classes. Please enjoy. This is the lesson for February 19th through 26th, 2 Nephi chapters 6 through 10. Today's topics are perfect knowledge of guilt, to be learned is good, to be spiritually minded is life eternal. Jacob is preaching in these chapters. It feels a lot like Puritan preaching to me, especially parts of chapter 9, very fire and brimstone. He literally mentions fire and brimstone a couple times. I picked out a few ideas that I think are worth exploring more closely. The first is from 2 Nephi chapter 9, verse 14. Wherefore we shall have a perfect knowledge of all our guilt, and our uncleanness, and our nakedness, and the righteous shall have a perfect knowledge of their enjoyment, and their righteousness, being clothed with purity, yea, even with the robe of righteousness. I thought the phrase perfect knowledge of all our guilt was interesting. It feels kind of threatening, I think. I think Jacob is trying to use fear as a motivation. Fear can be a strong motivator in the short term, but it doesn't truly change hearts. But I think the idea behind the threat is that we will see ourselves clearly. Almost all the time, we see ourselves through rose-colored glasses, and we're really good at self-deception. We form opinions about others based on what they do and say, but we base what we think of ourselves on our most generous thoughts and intentions rather than just what we do. Frankly, our actions say a lot more about our character than our internal dialogue ever does. When the consequences of our actions hurt people, and we want to apologize and explain the hurt wasn't our intention, it falls completely flat. We still hurt them. So, in my opinion, we don't see ourselves as clearly as we see others. I feel like this is a major reason for some conflict in relationships. We want our good intentions to be how we're seen. So we feel misjudged by partners, but in reality, they see us more clearly. I agree with the idea that we will see ourselves more clearly in the afterlife. Maybe our self-deception will be completely expunged in the resurrection. Being able to see yourself clearly now takes radical honesty and a willingness to be seen as wrong. You have to be brave and admit that you are fallible, just like every other human being. You need to be willing to see the parts of yourself that are not good. Even though it's difficult, I think we should be trying to see ourselves as clearly as we can now. We should be asking ourselves what our actions say about our character. We should be asking our partners or those close to us where we don't see ourselves clearly. What are our blind spots? We shouldn't wait until after this life to have a more perfect knowledge of ourselves. Waiting to do so is lazy and ineffectual. It doesn't leave room in our lives for the atonement. I believe our theology supports lifelong learning and refining, and my understanding of the atonement is that it is the way by which we are able to forgive ourselves and become more like our heavenly parents. I believe it's an act of faith in ourselves and our heavenly parents to be striving to truly know ourselves now so we can be more loving toward others and ourselves. The next idea I want to discuss is from chapter 9, verses 28 and 29. Oh, that cunning plan of the evil one, oh, the vainness and the frailties and the foolishness of men. When they are learned, they think they are wise, and they hearken not unto the counsel of God, for they set it aside, supposing they know of themselves. Wherefore their wisdom is foolishness, and it profiteth them not, and they shall perish. But to be learned is good, if they hearken to the counsels of God. This was a scripture mastery passage when I went through seminary, but it's not part of the current seminary doctrinal mastery scriptures. I feel like this verse has been twisted by some to demonize advanced education, and especially people who leave the church. This verse lays out some good arguments against those who leave the church. If you leave, you're vain, frail, foolish. You thought you were wise. You thought you knew better than God. The devil got you with his cunning plan. None of that actually reflects reality for most people who leave the church. The verses are also interpreted to say that the only way education is good is if you stick with the church. I'll be honest that I feel like the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints gives messages that promote education, but also warns about it. I guess that is in line with these verses. They want their male members educated so they have higher earning power. But I also think that they fear women being equally educated because then women have more freedom and are less dependent. Women often also become disenchanted by not being treated as equals in the hierarchy of the church. Another issue is how educated and working women are treated in their wards. When I lived in Boston, it was pretty normal to have highly educated working women making a healthy percentage of the women in the ward. Outside of Boston and perhaps a few other large cities, there aren't a lot of women in Relief Society who are doctors and lawyers and in other high-demand professions. My wife is a highly educated working professional. At church, she has been judged for not being a stay-at-home mom, excluded from social engagements, disparaged for not being available during the workday for church service. These all happen frequently, and the offenses are done to her by other women. In a highly patriarchal society like the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, women are pitted against women to try to tear each other down, which has the effect of keeping the women distracted and the men in power. It also feels like my wife has been excluded from church callings because she will rightly prioritize her family and career over church callings. These are all ridiculous things that men never, ever have to deal with. The way many in the church view the education of women is a complete distortion from reality, because the reality is that working moms have more successful daughters and more caring sons. Working moms have better mental health. And all of this is backed up by studies and research. I feel like the church is trying to walk a fine line with education now. I think that the church has made a lot of moves to educate under its own purview. The church has its own universities. If you go to an LDS university, you are basically compelled to stick with the church regardless of your honest beliefs, or they can expel you. The church also has a lot of online educational resources now that are relatively new. It again creates an opportunity for education, but it keeps the church at the center. I don't have any experience with these new online educational programs, but I am a graduate of BYU. I fully expect the church will continue to expand the educational arm of its empire in order to work toward the goal of greater education while keeping members highly dependent on the church as the source of the educational opportunities. Personally, while I do believe in following God, I think being learned or educated is good. Full stop. Whatever you want to do in life, education will benefit you. I work toward an advanced degree that I've never used. Some would say it was a waste of time and money, but the education I received really enriched me. I feel like I'm a smarter person because of it. Education creates greater freedom and less dependence, and freedom, I believe, is a primary source of happiness. The last idea I'm going to discuss this week is from chapter 9, verse 39. O my beloved brethren, remember the awfulness in transgressing against that holy God, and also the awfulness of yielding to the enticements of that cunning one. Remember, to be carnally minded is death, and to be spiritually minded is life eternal. The part that stood out to me was the last phrase, because it reminded me of President Nelson's recent General Conference talk, Think Celestial. He even references this verse. I have been hearing a lot of people reference this talk since October 2023 General Conference. It's become kind of huge. I've had the impression for many years that Nelson has wanted something he says to go Mormon viral, I guess is the best word to say it. Hinckley had his 6 Bs blow up. Bednar's Tender Mercies was really big. I think Nelson has been trying to create something that will catch on like those for many, many years. In 2013, Nelson tried really hard with Catch the Wave, for those of you who remember that talk. Honestly, Think Celestial is probably the best he's done in achieving that goal. My main critique for Think Celestial is that it's more about a catchphrase going viral than getting to deeper truth. In Nelson's talk, he defines what he means by Think Celestial. He says, thinking celestial means being spiritually minded. That's it for how he defines it. But being spiritually minded is the much more expansive and enriching idea. Thinking celestial is more limited, but it's also more memorable, so it makes a better catchphrase. Within Think Celestial, there's an end goal in mind, because celestial in our church is intrinsically tied to the celestial kingdom, our afterlife goal, whereas being spiritually minded isn't encumbered by that end goal. Being spiritually minded is more about what kind of people we want to be now than where we want to go after this life. Another way Think Celestial is an inferior idea is that it only means something to members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. This is kind of cult-like. Organizations that want people to be devotees create their own sort of language, words and phrases that only mean something to others in the organization, so that knowing the language carries a feeling of belonging and being special, and members can then suss out those who don't belong or who aren't current in their beliefs, like if you're inactive. Cults do this all the time. but it's also a strategy used by corporations. Starbucks created their own language for ordering coffee. It's an effective strategy, but I don't like it. I feel like there's a dishonesty in it. Being spiritually minded is something that everyone can understand. It doesn't matter your religious background. I think there's greater power in the universality of being spiritually minded rather than the exclusive notion of things celestial. My last critique of things celestial is that the church can readjust the definition to suit its purposes whenever it wants over time. Once the members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints have bought into the idea of things celestial, all it takes is for an apostle to say, thinking celestial means blank. And then its definition has been changed. Because people had already bought in, then they are much more likely to blindly accept the adjusted definition without thought. I would not be surprised at all if this happened in the next 5 to 10 years. I kind of feel like this happened with Bednar's Tender Mercies, but frankly, Bednar did the redefining himself. With Tender Mercy, the words themselves do not mean a personally meaningful spiritual experience. But that's what it means now in our church, because that's how he defined it and it caught on. You cannot redefine what it means to be spiritually minded because it's not a catchphrase. That makes it a more powerful idea. Going back to the verse, to be spiritually minded is life eternal. I love this idea. Being spiritually minded gives the sense of going beyond the here and now and seeing beyond the physical surface. I like that Jacob paired it with life eternal. Eternal always makes me think of God rather than endless time. I think I got that idea from Doctrine and Covenants, section 19. So to me, this is saying that being spiritually minded is godly. It's something we can practice now. It makes us a better person now, and it can make us more loving toward others. That's it for this week. Thanks for listening. Please share with family and friends. Until next time.